Okay, good. So today we're going to look at a painful case, which I had asked you to read last night. So we'll take a look at that today, and we'll spend the second half of the period talking about Thursday's quiz on Dubliners. So a painful case is the last story that we're reading in full. Tomorrow we'll look at just the ending of The Dead, which is the last story in the collection, do some review. Thursday will be our quiz. Again, what will happen with that is you'll come in, you'll get a prompt, you'll have some options of 2 stories and a theme. You'll talk about how that theme is expressed in those stories. Okay. So any questions on anything before we begin? Okay, great. So here's our objective for today. Discuss a painful case and practice comparing and contrasting it with another story from Dubliners. I want to begin though with this question, because this is kind of what the story addresses, and although it addresses a lot of other things as well. I also apologize, this is kind of heteronormative language, so you could adjust the genders as you see fit, but do you ever think it's possible for a guy and a girl just to be friends? I also recognize this might be kind of a personal question, so I get it if you don't want to weigh in and you could just think about it, but any thoughts? You can put it in the chat or raise your hand and share. That's funny. Emma, what do you think?
I think guys and girls can be friends because it's like if you don't show any like other feelings to them and you just are friendly to them, I don't see why they can't be friends.
Okay, good. So that's a yay on that side. I'm also kind of wondering if guys will have a different response to this than girls. It'd be interesting to see. Let me see. I just mean in general. Yeah. One of you, anyone else want to weigh in? I think they could be just friends, but I feel like it'll cross one of their minds if they could be more. That's kind of where I land on it. Like, I think it's possible, but I think it probably at some point will just like occur in someone's mind. You know, whether that leads anywhere, very possible not, but certainly it happens. But this is what the story gets into, and we'll talk about how this idea pops up here with James Duffy and Emily Sinico, the 2 main characters here, and how it has sort of tragic results for them. I'll say that a painful case for me is, like, my favorite story in Dubliners is Evelyn. And then like a painful case is right underneath it. Neither of them are, you know, the most famous stories from Dubliners, but really they have like such heart-wrenching stories about people who just end up stuck in life because of these decisions. And they're just really painful and moving portraits of this, like, you know, of helplessness. So we'll get into all that. I know it's one of the longer stories though, and I imagine a lot of you were working on your essays last night, so didn't get to devote as much attention as you maybe would have liked to reading. So I want to give you a few minutes just to refresh your memory on the story before we get into a discussion. Okay. So I have 5 discussion questions. We're not going to submit these, but you should come up with answers to them. So what I want you to do is spend like 5 minutes or so just refreshing your memory, looking through the story again, and see if you could come up with answers to these. And if you can answer these, I will say you probably have a pretty good grasp of the story. And then we'll go through and use this as a basis for a discussion, a longer discussion on overall what's happening. Okay. So spend, I don't know, we could meet up again at like 11:46 or so. to talk about the story and talk about these questions. Okay, so take your best shot at these. Okay, well, why don't we bring it back together, whether or not you are ready, and start going over these and talking about what we found. So, a painful case, like I said, focuses on Mr. James Duffy. And oops, hold on a second. Are you guys seeing the Word document? Okay, cool. Um, on Mr. James Duffy, and this is one of the stories in the adulthood section. So we read all the stories from childhood. Yesterday, Evelyn is from the adolescent section. This is a story from adulthood. So we can see how Joyce is treating the same themes differently in different parts of someone's life, and still see those connections with the earlier sections. Okay, so tell me about Mr. James Duffy, and in particular, how the setting and his room gives us hints about his personality. I'll say that you can look at this highlighted section here in particular to get some good hints. Emma, what did you notice?
As I read that section, I noticed that like all of it is just for convenience of like what he needs. He doesn't really have anything like personal like stuff he'd want in his house. It's more of like he needs it. That's what he needs to live. That's all he needs in his house.
Yeah, very good. It's bare, only the essentials. Um, One line that stands out to me is the lofty walls of his uncarpeted room were free from pictures. Okay, free from pictures. So what do we mean by pictures? On one hand, maybe this means free from paintings or illustrations, drawings, kind of artwork, which itself sounds kind of drab. There are no decorations, no decor here. On the other hand, maybe pictures means pictures of family, pictures of relatives. Well, in that case too, like he obviously isn't invested much in close companionship if he doesn't have any pictures of people close to him up in his house, right? So Joyce is suggesting with the setting how solitary this guy is. Kendall, what else did you say?
I was just gonna say that he lives a life of solitude and doesn't really mind it at first. Like he kind of likes being in his own head and just thinking for himself.
Good. That's a good point. Yeah, he's alone, but he likes it that way, and he does spend a lot of time living in his own head. We'll talk about that more in just a second. Good. Any other lines here that you can point out that help add detail to his personality? What do you make of the fact that he found all of the other suburbs of Dublin mean, modern, and pretentious? What does that tell us about how he feels about other people? Great, Joy. Sorry, a little louder. Mm-hmm. Right, good. So if you guys couldn't hear that at home, it was uh, Mr. Duffy is probably looking down on these other people, and he has this particular way that he likes to order things, and anything not like that, he's not going to like. I mean, something to point out, the words mean, modern, and pretentious. So mean here, he doesn't mean cruel, but he means kind of low class or basic. Modern, he means like in a modern style, like flashy, too showy, in contrast to the simplicity of his home, and pretentious, again, too showy. He likes things really bare and simple and unadorned, which is kind of ironic because pretentious usually means like you're showing off because you think you're better than other people, or you want to say, look at what I have. Um, Duffy's also pretentious in a way. You get the feeling that he thinks he's better than everyone else. He has kind of like hipster vibes about him in that he's like, I'm gonna live over here. I don't want to live near everyone else. They're doing their thing. I don't really like that. And he feels, you could tell that he feels like he's better than everyone else in his own way. Also notice the home just to, I don't need to beat a dead horse, but just, Joyce does such a good job with characterizing him through his home. He has an iron bedside, an iron washstand, fender and irons on a square table. Right, a lot of the furniture in his home is made of metal, again suggesting his kind of rigid, orderly, cold nature, right? So just in these few sentences, we basically know everything we need to about him. Joyce goes on to describe him more. A few nice descriptions here. A medieval doctor would have called him Saturnine. That line might have given you pause. Saturnine refers to an idea from astrology, just like with constellations. If you're born under a certain constellation, you have a certain disposition. Medieval doctor said if you were born when a certain planet was prominent in the sky, you would have a certain personality. So for them, if you were born when Saturn was prominent in the sky, then you were Saturnine. That meant that you like things orderly, you were kind of serious and sober-minded and not very warm and fuzzy, right? And then, like we talked about earlier, he's always in his own head. He had an odd autobiographical habit, which led him to compose in his mind from time to time a short sentence about himself containing a subject in the third person and a predicate in the past tense. Right? This is his like self-narration when he walks around. It's as if every time I moved around, I would say, Mr. La Luna just taught the lesson. Mr. La Luna picked up his mug of tea. There's this kind of weird out-of-body quality to him, and he's almost observing himself like a character in a movie. He's just kind of seeing his life go by. So that's what's normal for him until he meets Mrs. Sinico. So tell me about her and their relationship. Yes, Kendall.
They met at what I think was an opera house, and she kind of introduced herself to him, and she was kind of nervous to talk to him, and she had her daughter with her, and then they kept seeing each other at the opera the next week, and then again, sort of on accident, then they arranged to meet together, then they just would keep meeting together and stuff, and they developed a sort of friendship, like he would tell her things, tell her his ideas and stuff. Then eventually it progressed, but Duffy kind of cut it off at that point.
Yeah, good, and we'll get to that in a second. But I just want to emphasize that that they, Duffy is so solitary, and yet it's just like by chance, serendipitously, he meets someone who also likes the same things. He's kind of this outcast. He doesn't like mainstream stuff, but he likes going to the opera. Meets someone who likes going to the opera, and he's able to have all these deep conversations with her, where they're not just like talking about gossip and pop culture. They're talking about things that he finds important. They're talking about morality. They're talking about politics. They're talking about economics. And he feels like he's found a kindred spirit in her. One problem, she's married. Although, what can we tell about her relationship with her husband? Okay, Kendall, what do we know about that, their relationship?
They're not very happy. It said in the newspaper thing about her death that they were together, I think 26 years, which is a long time, and he's never home. So I think she's just sort of bored and unhappy with him.
Good, yeah, it seems like a loveless sort of marriage. This line to me is like such a punch in the gut. Captain Sinico, the husband, dismissed his wife so sincerely from his gallery of pleasures that he did not suspect that anyone else would take an interest in her. He was so uninterested and so unattracted to his wife that the thought that someone else would find her attractive just did not even occur to him. Like, that's when you know things are pretty bad. So the husband doesn't even care that she's spending all her free time with this guy, because he thinks that it's just a platonic relationship. And their friendship becomes more intense, more intimate, until it comes to a head. And you're kind of expecting, I don't know, them to have an affair and it to blow up, or them to kiss or something. But it's nothing at all that intense. Simply they're talking one night, and Mrs. Sinico takes his hand and presses it against her cheek, right? Totally scandalous. That's what happens. Uh, and so, maybe this is in a different type of story, this could be the first moment that led to a passionate affair. But what happens instead? How does Duffy react? And how does his opinion about her change? What does he do next? You could raise your hand, put it in the chat. Great, Dave, what happens?
He thinks that she like misinterpreted like what their relationship and what they were doing together was, and he just decides to ghost her and like not visit her anymore. And then he like arranges like a one last meeting to like cut it off entirely.
Yeah, great. It's such a strange reaction. You would think that he would be excited about this, that it's a step forward with her relationship. So, why do you guys think he reacts this way? Why not, try to, if she's in a loveless marriage, why not convince her to get a divorce? Why not be together? Why is he reacting this way? You think he doesn't like her? I mean, that's actually fair and like an open question because clearly like they have a bond. There's like some compatibility there. I mean, maybe it is that he just doesn't like her. It's very possible. Kendall?
I just wanted to point out a line that I really liked. It's at the bottom of page 3. It says, "But here she began to tremble so violently that fearing another collapse on her part, he bade her goodbye and quickly and left her." I really like that line because it shows how like heart-wrenching that was to her to finally leave him, because it showed that she really did like him and thought that she had a connection with him.
Yeah, I really feel for her in this because clearly she's been lonely and isolated, and just as at least I'm like looking at Duffy and saying like, hey, you could like find someone and be happy. So too with her, like maybe she could leave her husband and then get into like an actual fulfilling relationship, but it doesn't happen. To me, I wonder if Duffy is just emotionally unavailable. I don't think he would spend this much time with her unless on some level he was attracted to her. But he can't like process that. Like the first hint of intimacy, he freaks out. And you kind of get the feeling like this is probably not a guy who has gone out on many dates and is not really used to this kind of thing. And so just like Evelyn, he has this kind of flight reaction. In this case, he just freezes. Is like, no, no thanks, not for me. I'm going to go back to what's comfortable and what I'm used to. So then years pass until he comes across this article in the newspaper, a painful case referring to the death of a woman who, of course, turns out to be Mrs. Sinico. So what happens with this? Reading between the lines, what actually happens, and then reading between the lines, what can we maybe infer actually happened that caused her death? So she gets hit by a train, but what's fishy about all that? It's all good. Emma?
What I found like strange about it is like, how did he not hear or see like a coming train? And like it says she got caught on something, but like I felt like she kind of knew it was coming and just didn't put an effort to not stop or like move at all.
Yeah, good, good. Kendall, anything to add to that?
Yeah, you can kind of infer that I wouldn't say intentional, but that it kind of was coming, because later it says in the witness statement from the daughter that she had taken on drinking and that her daughter even tried to get her help for that. But you can kind of assume that she wasn't in the right frame of mind that day.
Yeah, good. So in typical Joyce fashion, it's ambiguous, but note that this is the slow train. It's not like it was moving at a high speed and could have taken her by surprise. Like, it wasn't moving that fast. Most people could have gotten out of the way. We know that like there was a guard's whistle, so there was a loud noise indicating the train was starting to move. And then just like a second or two after it started moving, that's when this happened. So the train is barely moving and she stumbles in front of it and gets hit. So possibly it was deliberate or even subconsciously deliberate. Possibly she was just like so out of it she didn't realize what happened. But yeah, she was. We do know that things have gone way downhill for her leading up to this. She'd become sort of an alcoholic, and that this is kind of like the end result of her life spiraling out of control, which of course corresponded with the end of her friendship with Mr. Duffy. So Duffy has kind of a mixed reaction to her death. How does he react to it? And what do we see as the epiphany of the story? All right, Kendall, go ahead.
At first, he says evidently she had been unfit to live without any strength of purpose and easy prey to habits, one of the wrecks of which civilization has been reared. It kind of shows that he's like, oh, she wasn't strong enough to live, and he sort of thought that, I don't know. But then later he remembers about him touching his cheek and holding hands and kind of mourns her, thinking of what could have been, and sort of feels like it's his fault for leaving her.
Yeah, good. It's kind of weird. At first, he's almost like victim blaming. The whole narrative of her death revolted him and revolted him to think that he had ever spoken to her. It's like, oh, I can't believe I ever interacted with that woman. But then I think he thinks back to that happy memory, like you're pointing out, and he's thinking to himself, oh, wow, I'm really alone. Let's see. I'll just read this section. This is where we'll end up. As he sat there, living over his life, with her and evoking alternatively the two images in which he now conceived of her, he realized that she was dead, that she had ceased to exist, that she had become a memory. He began to feel ill at ease. He asked himself, what else could he have done? He could not have carried on a comedy of deception with her. He could not have lived with her openly. He had done what seemed to him best. How was he to blame? Now that she was gone, he understood how lonely her life must have been, sitting night after night alone in that room. His life would be lonely too until he too died, ceased to exist, became a memory, if anyone remembered him. So there's this weight of realization that's starting to fall over him, like, oh, like recognizing the pain she must have experienced and also seeing that he's kind of now fated to experience the same kind of loneliness as well. Yeah, Kendall.
He said that he was trying to himself what else he could have done. So he also said he could not have carried on a comedy of deception. Does that mean that he is emotionally unavailable, that he has no sense of emotion pretty much? Because what it seemed like earlier when he was thinking about the good memories they had, that he enjoyed it, but hearing that, it just seems like he doesn't have any emotions.
Yeah. I think he does, but they're buried really far down. So by comedy of deception, to me, what this makes me think of is he can't keep up the deception that it's just a friendship when she has feelings for him. So we talked about his rigid personality and always wanting things just so. So I think in his mind, the idea of spending any time with a woman in a relationship who's interested in him is just unacceptable because it's like against the rules and he's all about things being orderly. Um, and also, this is a time when you couldn't really get divorced. I mean, you could, but it was a lot messier and there was a big social stigma around it. So Mrs. Sinico can't just say, hey, sorry, Captain, no love here. I'll see you later. I'm going to go marry this guy instead. Like, if she does that, then there's going to be this kind of religious judgment around her, unfortunately. So I think he sees it as sort of a lost cause. At some level, I interpret it as him liking her and wishing things were different. But it's just kind of, I don't know, in a way, it's no one's fault, maybe society's fault, but he recognizes that the way he is couldn't be happy, staying there with her. Does that kind of make sense? I'll assume so. Okay. All right. So that is a painful case. It's a real bummer, but also, I think, a really well-written story. So I want to spend the end here just putting this all together, thinking about contrasts between this story and the other ones. Okay. So I want to do like a little practice here. When you get your quiz on Thursday, it'll be one general prompt and then 3 prompts that you could choose between. The general prompt will basically say, in a few paragraphs, write a topic sentence that addresses the similarities and differences between 2 stories and support that topic sentence with ample evidence from the stories. Okay. I think actually to do a good job, you really would need 2 paragraphs. You could do one big one if you want, but I think 2 paragraphs makes more sense. And you don't have to write this right now. You can if you would like to, and it would help you with the quiz. But let's just spend a few minutes considering this question and this prompt. So the format will look like this, but the story titles and the theme will be different. Okay, so consider a painful case and the first story, the sisters. What do you think a good interpretation of this could be? How is the idea of epiphany shown similarly and differently in these 2 stories? I'll let you just like think about it for a few minutes. You could jot down some ideas, maybe write the opening of a response to this, and then we'll just talk about how you would approach it, how I would approach it, my recommendations. You just take another minute to finish this before we talk. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. I just want you to practice this a little. All right, so why don't we just share some ideas that we had? Anyone want to go first? Just you don't have to read what you wrote, but comparing these stories, how do they each show epiphany in a different way, and what similarities do they have? Okay, let's go with Karina and then Kendall.
I think just both of them, kind of the epiphany came from like a death, but in the sisters, like he realized more that he kind of felt weirdly better after the death of the priest, but in a painful case, obviously he wasn't happy that it happened.
Good. Yeah, I like how you focused in on another concept like death, and then looked at the complex reactions, because in both cases there are mixed feelings, and definitely with the boy's reaction to the priest, on one hand he feels maybe free, uh, but on the other hand there's a sense of loss of a mentor and confusion because this mentor figure is also going crazy. We don't really know why. So good. I like that. This is a good strategy for you guys as you're thinking about writing this. Look for some concept beyond the theme that's shared. In this case, there's an epiphany. The concept that unites epiphany in both stories is death, and then play around with that. Good. And then Kendall, what did you come up with?
I found the similarity that death sort of revealed something to the boy and to Mr. Duff. Like in the sisters, the boy realized that the priest was sort of mentally crazy and losing his mind, and in this one, he realized that she was depressed and going through something and not as happy as he once thought. So the death sort of revealed the suffering that both of these characters went through.
Good. Good. Yeah, and I like that same prominent idea of death and noticing their suffering as well. Another approach would be to, contrast the idea of childhood and adulthood in these sections. You could contrast talk about the inability to like truly understand another person. For the boy, it's his inability to understand or be respected by adults. For Duffy, it's obviously his inability to understand and connect to Mrs. Sinico. So let me show you just a couple of ways to approach this, a way that would be good and a way that wouldn't be good, and then we'll go. Actually, we're really short on time, so I'll just show you one way to approach it. I'll just let you actually read this on your own, but here's a sample that I came up with. Not doing what I think you should do. I don't need with these quizzes any like fancy opener. You don't need to spend like 3 sentences waxing poetic on love. Just like the very first sentence of the quiz, mention the 2 stories, talk about their similarities, and have another sentence clarify their differences, right? Elaborate a little. And then in the next paragraph, you could talk about the specific examples from the story that show the main difference you're highlighting. we'll review this more tomorrow and talk about all the stories tomorrow. But that's it for today. Anyone have any questions before we go? Great. Thanks for your efforts today, guys. I will see you later. Have a good one.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.